2000. So in 2009, we adopted the response framework to be department-wide. So it was originally drafted to be for aquatics, but then we made a lot of edits to make it department-wide, so it could include all invasive species. So my first slide shows a helicopter with a SWAT team coming down, and the question on it says, what is rapid response? And you see the word rapid is struck out because we've learned that we do try to respond quickly when we find a new important invasive species, but and we used to call everything rapid response with these exercises and plans, but we've learned that it's not really that rapid. It does take time. We like to be thoughtful and considerate of everybody who's going to be involved. So we've gotten away from using the word rapid. So the Department's Invasive Species Framework, it outlines steps that we follow following new detections of invasive species. It was adopted by the department in 2017. So it's been a few years now. What you see here is just an overview of what's in the response framework. It has a series of steps, the 1 through 8. We start with the early detection and reporting, verification, notification, rapid assessment, planning, response, monitoring and evaluation, and restoration. And then on the left arrow that points down is about the timeline, which it varies from response to response. And then you see here, public outreach doesn't start until after notification has begun. The first step is the reporting invasive species. We have a website on the DNR website. You just Google invasive species or even report invasive species, and this is the site that you'll see. There's different tabs, one for aquatic, shoreline, and wetland, one for terrestrial, and then one that just is for NR40 species. That's a link to the rule. This web page gives you a lot of different hyperlinks for who to contact, where you can check for known invasive species, and then how to report given what the species is. We've got different procedures still for plants, animals, or if it's a fish population. Throughout this PowerPoint in the bottom right is just the diagram of what the whole framework is, so you can see where we're at. So the next step is verification. Before we start telling everyone we found something, we have to go through verification. We interview the reporter, get an expert ID, we collect vouchers, we visit the site just to verify what's there and about how much. And by we, it doesn't necessarily have to be DNR. We've worked with partners in the past too. Then we start communicating. We notified the resource managers. We have to notify supervisors, division administrators within the department, also local stakeholders, so people who live on the water body or a wetland or an area of land or property. Then we identify a team and a lead coordinator that are going to work through the process of what this document is. And then start working on internal and external communications, identify roles and responsibilities for who's going to do what and what is the message that we're going to share, make sure that we have talking points. This is a screenshot of the department's aquatic invasive species communication protocol. This is only page 1 of multiple pages that outline with flowcharts of who you contact when, and given if it's a prohibited species or a restricted species. And I want to point out, this says it's the AIS communication protocol. So we're working with the department of trying to come up with a department-wide communication protocol, just so that we're all doing similar things or something we agree upon. Then the next step is for assessment. That's where we delimit the invasion. How expansive is it within the water body or the nearby water bodies or forests or trail systems? Conduct literature reviews to learn more about the species. If it's a new species to the state, what's the seed viability? How does it get around, what types of pathways will move each of the species. And then we just take time to marshal resources. What kind of grant program is there, or do the local stakeholders have funds to help fund the effort? And then the next step is planning. That's where we take time to just clearly identify like what our objective is, whether we want to contain this, if we want to eradicate the species that's present, just reduce it to a minimized level so it'll have less impacts. If we just want to watch it, don't do anything. There will be discussions within the local team to decide what's best given that situation. Then develop what the actions are that we want to implement, whether it's just education, letting people know, or if we actually want to go in and try to eradicate and look at what the impacts will be of that activity. And then we make decisions and then develop a plan and then come up with an evaluation plan. Are you just going to monitor it the once? No, you will need to go back, do some pre and post treatment monitoring, but you work with a group of people to determine what that will be. And then we go ahead and we implement. So work with all the stakeholders that are part of the team that came up with whatever the plan is that you want to implement. And then move forward. Here we just have screenshots of things like giving the presentations, a waiter wash station to make sure we clean our equipment. And here's a boat that's spraying herbicide on whatever species is here. This is a picture, it looks like from the Upper Sugar River Watershed Association with zebra mussels. There's a boat wash that's probably being used to clean boats. And then monitoring and evaluation. So we've established our plan, and within that plan identifies where you're going to monitor and when, probably immediately after treatment. If you're going to do surveillance monitoring, identify what your lessons are, the lessons learned were through the process. Then revise your approach if needed before moving forward. And then restoration. This is often the step that we don't get to because we're busy getting through the rest of the steps. But so if you've gone through and you've controlled a species at a location, there should always be some thought and restoration just to make sure that you've restored it to some level that the group has decided upon to help reduce the impacts. Oh, and this is just a fun slide I always use at the end of a presentation, that life is easier when you've got a posse. I feel like I went through that somewhat quickly. I do have one other slide to help prep for the breakout group, to think about. I'll just share this, but then see if there were any questions about the whole process.
Maureen, this is Kathy Higley.
Yeah, hi Kathy.
So you mentioned restoration. When it comes to say like aquatic invasive species, what kind of options do we have for that?
That's a good question. It's good too to talk to your local aquatic plant management person. I don't know if that's Kevin or if it's Scott Van Egeren for you. I think it would depend on the species. If something like a prohibited species comes in and you've got to nuke the lake, I don't know what the likelihood is that we would let that happen. But say if it's a riparian species and you pull out a bunch of yellow iris or Japanese knotweed or even Phragmites, but then you leave this bare spot of soil on the shoreline, that could create erosion issues. So you'd want to have some kind of native planting to do. We can plant native plants in the lake bed also, but I don't know that that happens quite as often, which is where you'd want to work with the local resource manager. But good question.
We have a couple of the lakes biologists with us today. Did maybe any of you have any examples to help with Kathy's question? I think Sue Graham was on. Can't remember who else I saw. Otherwise, feel free to unmute and ask questions of Maureen. We have plenty of time.
And if I could just put my another 2 cents in here, underwater gardening sounds very fun.
It does, and I think it's, I don't know who has experience with that. Did you say the lake coordinators are on? I guess who didn't speak up?
This is Stephanie. I have a comment about the native restoration aspect of it. Our department does a lot of pollinator restoration projects along roadsides and in yards, and then as well as restoring areas that have been impacted by TIS and AIS. And we collect native seeds and germinate these seeds. And my yard is currently filled right now with 4 big wooden seed frames, each filled with about, I don't know, 200 pots each of all the native seeds that we have been germinating for the last 2 years. And I like to keep those on hand because if I'm going to a site visit where there's yellow iris or purple loosestrife, I'll grab some of these plants and take them with me to that site, especially if it's a riparian owner's property. And that way we can plug those plants in right away as soon as we dig out those invasives. So that's just one system that we use here in Oneida County.
That's really great stuff. Thanks for sharing that. I'm sure that some of the other counties have done similar activities.
I remember way back when I was interning at Lake Ripley, they did some experimentation with planting bulrush, trying to cage it, because the ducks would pull it out or whatever, but it happens. But yeah, I'm not familiar with how often actually planting in the water is taking place, or if there's a lot of experimentation on it.
I see Paul Skowinski's on, and Paul, I know that there were folks, what's the lake in the southeast that did do plantings? I think
Lulu Lake is probably what you're thinking of. Yeah. So that was Tim Gerber from La Crosse that was working with the Nature Conservancy on Lulu Lake, and they were using a burlap mat that was pre-vegetated. So they had it sort of set up in a lab environment, and they were weaving rhizomes of, I think, Illinois pondweed and a couple of other pondweed species into this burlap mat, and then sinking that down in areas where they had hand-pulled milfoil out of, and they'd hold that down with, I'm not sure if it was rocks or sandbags or stakes or how they fastened it to the bottom. I don't know a lot of the results from that. Last time I asked about it, the results weren't ready, but that was probably a couple of years ago. As far as restoring things though in shallow water, I know one of the biggest concerns is the wave action. So you can't just put a small plug or a potted plant into the lake sediment and expect it to stay there. It usually gets moved by wave action. So putting up logs or some kind of a barrier to create a calm area along the shoreline, protected from wave action, is a way to increase the success of that kind of a planting. But they are challenging to try to get natives back into the lake.
Hey Maureen, this is Matt. I often see Amanda Smith posting prohibited discoveries on the listserv as far as notification, but really nobody else. So is that something you'd like everyone to do in general, or as far as notification? I know we tell you, obviously, and the whole DNR staff, but what other kind of statewide communications would you like from them?
That's a good question. I don't have open right now, but I will, our communication protocol. So it's going to make a difference if it's restricted or prohibited. A restricted species doesn't typically get announced on the listserv, but a prohibited would. Unless it's an important restricted species to the area that it's not found in that part of the state. So you should be, when there's a new prohibited species, there should be a message going to the listserv. I'll work on bringing up the communication protocol so you can take a peek, but I don't think I don't want to take too much time.
But those do come through the AIS coordinators. I mean, the DNR regional coordinators, so correct, not the partners. Maybe an update might come from a partner, but the initial announcement, don't we always do those through the DNR AIS coordinators?
They should be through the regional AIS coordinators. Yeah, I'm trying to think of we had 6 significant discoveries last year, but not all of them were prohibited. Well, we had the Japanese stilt grass in La Crosse County. I believe that went out to the listserv. Does that sound? I think that would have been Alex L. I'm not sure if he was on the call. It's hard to multitask, typing and talking.
So it sounds like, so Shelby and I have been verifying some frag stands in prohibited counties. So once that's official, sounds like she'd be the person to do that. Most likely Shelby Adler. So that sounds like the correct call for now.
Oh, because you're Phragmites that are in a prohibited area. Yeah, right. She would be the one. But I don't know. And maybe she would be a little less likely to do that, but I'm actually not quite sure on that, because technically if it's prohibited, that should go out to the AIS listserv. But a species like Phragmites is fairly widespread throughout the state, so she might be a little hesitant to send the email to the whole group. But technically, as it's written, you would send it out. So good question.
As long as I'm not doing it wrong currently, let me know. I'm always happy to share.
Yeah, that's something you can touch base with Shelby on too. Is Shelby on the call?
Yep, and yeah, that's actually something that is on my to-do list, because yeah, me and Matt have been going back and forth lately getting stuff verified, so there will probably be kind of an email with a few different new verifications of frag populations coming out sometime soon.
I don't have the chat open. Are there any other questions out there? Otherwise, good discussion, good questions. Anything anyone wants to add?
Jason had shared one of the links to the framework. So if anybody, it's one of the DNR web pages, the framework is linked to at the bottom of that. And then Tom Boivay noted that the St. Croix tribe has done a lot of work reseeding wild rice after years of common carp management. And it's starting to, and attempting to reseed, but with little success. Oh, I'm sorry, I just mixed up 2 different ones because another one came in. So they're being extremely successful, and then Green Lake is having not quite so much success. Working on it though.
Thank you, Jeannie. I don't know where to see the chat right now when I'm sharing.
Yeah, sometimes it's fine. If that toolbar won't come up.
It gets squirrely, but it's the upper right hand corner of your share setting. There's going to be, you got to punch out 3 buttons, and those chats are in the upper right hand corner of that.
Yeah, it can be variable depending on
I see
the different things I found. It could be at the bottom, it could be at the top, or sometimes you just can't find it. So, and then Michelle also is shared that MASEC is working on some restoration studies and put some links in here. So those will be interesting to look at. And oh my gosh, those all of a sudden came up. Tom and Anna sharing things about the rice. And then Chris asked about water clarity. So it's kind of an interesting side discussion and chat going on. If there's no more questions, though, specifically on Maureen's presentation, I want to tell her thank you, and we can go ahead and stop sharing. And then Anne is going to give us the update on the invasive plant phenology calendar.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Great. Well, good morning, everyone. So I first introduced this invasive species calendar, I think 2 years ago at the CISMA meeting. So I know lots of you have already seen this, but we have been updating it in the past few years. So first, I'm just going to let you know the easiest way to get to the calendar, and then we'll kind of walk through what the calendar looks like and how you might use it. So the easiest way to find it is from the First Detector Network web page under the Tools tab. Just click on Invasive Species Calendar, and then on this page, there's a link to just a one-page guide that kind of tells you about the features of the calendar, or you can just click on the picture to access the calendar. And so I think when I introduced this a couple of years ago, we only had terrestrial plants in here. Now we have a tab for invertebrates, but I don't think most of us are working with insects too much. So we'll head to our plants page. And then just a quick reminder for those who have seen this before, and introduction for those who haven't. The way the calendar is set up is that there is a row for each species and then a column for each month of the year. And the color of the circle for each month denotes what life stage that plant is most likely to be in that month. And obviously there's variability across the state from year to year. So we're kind of trying to go for a general average. It's hard to pin these things down. But then how filled in the circle is denotes the detectability. So if the circle is completely empty, it's pretty much undetectable in that month, not really worth your time looking for it. Fully filled in is its high detectability. So that's going to be kind of the easiest month to find that species. And then there's all of these drop-down menus right above the calendar that can help you filter the calendar. I actually don't know how many species we have in here right now. We're trying to add more as we get more phenology data, but for instance, if you wanted to check out a particular habitat, you could do that. We'll go with our aquatic and wetland species today. And once you apply that filter, the chart will update. Maybe we'll get rid of wetland because there's a lot that count as wetland in this calendar. And then you can further narrow down the calendar. So if we're just interested in checking out the next couple of months, so maybe April, May, June, we can apply that. And then for detectability, we could select species that are medium and high detectability, and that list should further shrink. So it's just a nice way to kind of, I mean, we really developed this for our WIFT volunteers initially, because they're like, great, I'm ready to look for invasive plants, but there's like hundreds of them. When should I look for them? And so that's kind of the goal behind this tool. Yeah, pretty straightforward. So don't need 10 minutes on this, but I'll just say for the breakout that we're doing later, I can talk more about how we built this tool or other tools using the Tableau software, because we've got a number of these interactive tools heading in, some under development still. But yeah, any questions about the calendar, or I'm happy to take that. Or if you explore this and you're wondering, like, why isn't species X on the calendar? Mostly it would be because we don't have data on it, particularly the emergence data for our plants is what's really tricky to pin down. So like, when does this plant come out in the spring? We pretty much know when things flower, but beyond that, we don't have a lot of data. So if there are species that aren't on here, we're happy to add more if we can get the phenology data, or if you review this and you're like, that phenology seems really off, definitely let me know. We're happy to revise, because obviously I'm in Madison. My experience with the plants over the past 10 years has primarily been from Southern Wisconsin, but we definitely want to hear from people across the state when you're seeing these plants pop out and flower and all that good stuff.
And is this visible on an iPhone or an Android phone? And how does it look different?
I think that it doesn't do great on phones. It's okay on tablets. So not a great tool, I guess, for the field if you're just on a phone, but it's something you can check out ahead of time. Or I know some groups that have volunteer monitors will kind of set them up with like a habitat and a month to let them know, like, hey, it's June, like, here's what you should be looking for in woodlands in June. So kind of set them up ahead of time.
So could you print out what you want to be looking for, and would that print out somewhat similar to what your screen is showing?
Yeah, so in the lower right corner of the calendar, there's this download button. And so you can choose from any number of formats in terms of how you want to print it out. So you could just do the image of what you're looking at or a PDF, and it will let you select basically whether you want the image of what's on your screen or the image of like the home page on here. Yeah, great question.
It would be cool to, for both of our listservs to like do a monthly search and then share it out to just, you know, in part remind people this exists, but then also, you know, here's what to look for. And we talk about that in the DIS communicators group and telling people what to look for, but we don't necessarily have time always to remember, but if we could just remember to do that maybe a month in advance with our listservs to remind folks, and then they can remind their partners, and we just get into a habit of it, then we could see this getting used much more regularly, because it's just so useful.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Jeannie. I do tend to do that with the WIFTIN newsletter list. So I'll, you know, take a screenshot of the calendar for the month and let people know, but I can certainly make an effort to make sure that gets out to the CISMA listserv and the AIS listserv as well.
Yeah, or I can, if one of us can nudge the other, I can take care of the AIS one just to help me get into the habit of making sure to make use of it.
So Anne, there's a lot of gaps in the data that you have, especially emergence. How could invasive species specialist help you fill those gaps?
So since it's been a couple of years since I put the bulk of this together, I think what'll happen is I'd have to go back and look at species for which we have some data but not complete, and kind of put together a list of that and send a request out to our groups to see if people have the data that we need. Yeah, so that's probably, I need to do a little bit of legwork and then just send that out to folks to let them know what we're looking for still.
I think it's great, Anne. I believe that Water Action Volunteers integrated some of the phenology charts into their protocols. My internet's so slow, I can't bring it up. But I think it's great if, like, when you email your folks, if you just email the other listservs, like what's to look for now.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Anne. And go ahead, if you think of a question after we move on, go ahead and put it in the chat. Next, Maureen's gonna give us an update. Many of you may have heard that there's been some movement in the world of Japanese knotweed biocontrol, and she's gonna let us know what folks who's been talking about it and where they're getting in that process.
All right, happy to help with that. And let's just see how well my screen shares again. That's not what I want to share. What are you seeing right now? I don't know which screen is sharing.
Looks like, oh, there you go. You got
it. Which PowerPoint? Okay, and you don't see all the notes on the side?
No, it's good now.
Okay, thank you, Jeannie. So just to give you an update on knotweed biocontrol. Let's see, so there's a complex of knotweeds that we have in the state: Japanese knotweed, giant knotweed, and Bohemian. So there's 3 different species known to be here. All are regulated under NR 40, some are restricted and some are prohibited. I'm sure you all are familiar with them. Let's see, the United States and the United Kingdom had a program that they've been working on for a long time to identify a biocontrol agent for knotweed, and they did identify one. It's a Apsyllid. The Latin name is there. I'm not going to try to pronounce it. It was first released in the United Kingdom in 2010 and then Canada in 2014. APHIS approved this organism to be used as biocontrol in the United States in 2020. So that's at the federal level. It was okay to introduce to here. After APHIS issued that permit process, there was a professor in Oregon who applied for the permit to release the Apsyllid in the state of Wisconsin. We reached out to them. We had multiple meetings with the DNR and then with folks from APHIS to just try to figure out, well, who issued this permit? Where is this person releasing them in Wisconsin? The researcher was from Oregon, and she actually let us know that she doesn't have any intention to actually release these in Wisconsin, and that they actually have really low survivability, that like they will all be gone and disappeared within a day. Like they just don't live here. I don't think it's the right climate for them. So they don't have any intention to release these Apsylids here in Wisconsin or even in the Midwest because they just don't survive. There are other species that they're going to be looking at though. Let's see, the species that they're looking at is originally from Japan, and the other species that they're looking at are also from Japan. The ones that they've looked at, let's see. I want to make sure. So they're going to look at other species, but like they haven't gone through the rigorous process to make sure that there's not other species that they will impact. But once there is a more suitable agent that will survive here in Wisconsin or in the Midwest in general, the Wisconsin DNR will work to determine whether there's an additional environmental assessment that's going to be needed and whether we'll be able to provide funding or anything like that through our various grant programs. But as of right now, these animals that they've identified just don't live here. They're not viable. And I think it's very frustrating for the researchers because they were hoping to use them, but it wasn't working. I'm not going to take much more time, but I do want to just point out this paper. I read it last night and this morning, and it was so informative. This is the title of it is Biology and Biological Control of Knotweeds. These are the authors that I list here, and this is a screenshot of what the cover of it looks like. It's a very comprehensive report. I'm fortunate that these organisms don't work as a biocontrol because they don't survive, but it was very well put together where it thought through like the different ways, how would you prioritize what your actions will be or what your end result or what you hope your end result will be. So I recommend just at least Googling this, reading through it because it's a great publication. And sorry, I don't have better news that there is an organism that can eradicate knotweed. There isn't yet in the Midwest. Let's see if
You ready for questions then?
Yeah, I can go for questions. I don't have anything after that. So it was more of a bummer. Let's see, where do I start? That was you, Jeannie and Amanda. So, so they just apply. We had a hard time. So Amanda asks, sorry if I missed it, but why do the Oregon folks apply for a permit if they never intended? They thought that they would be able to find a local person that they could work with to release them, but like they were working with someone in the upper Michigan, and they just couldn't get them to survive. So they really didn't actually need the permit. I think they were hoping that it could work, but it didn't. And Jason must have provided the link to the paper.
Did they have any idea of what was behind the lack of survival, and like if there's a possibility of, you know, was it temperature and maybe further south it would work or anything like that?
I can't even, I have the paper open, but I can't use my other screen. I might have to, I think they like die pretty instantly once they release them. So I mean, maybe it has to do with climate because they've used them in other locations. It's strange because you'd think the UK wouldn't be that much different from Wisconsin. Bugs need a pep talk. Thanks, Dara. It was not in the UP, not in Wisconsin. I don't think that they just survived at all. That was the professor, yeah, Fritzy.
And Chris asked, and this might be more for Kelly or someone, if about biocontrol for garlic mustard, if there were any updates on that recently. Does anyone have any knowledge of that?
Yeah, they've released the garlic mustard biocontrol, the one agent in Canada, but it still has not been approved for release in the United States. They're still waiting for the Fish and Wildlife Service to approve it. It's been in that status for a while without any real good explanation as to why they haven't gotten to it.
Thanks, Kelly.
Oh, Maureen, were you aware of, let's see what Lindsay has here. There will be some biocontrol trials taking place in the Kiwana, I'm probably saying that wrong.
Kiwani or Keweenaw Peninsula. I have to scroll and see. The Keweenaw is at the tip of it's in Lake Superior, essentially off Michigan. I think I saw Ramona commented too. Michigan State is doing research on the knotweed biocontrol in Michigan. Thanks, Ramona. And that must be what Lindsay's referring to. Is that right, Ramona? Okay, thanks. So Ramona said yes. You all can probably see the chat. And Lindsay said yep. So they're both talking about the same person. So the state of Michigan's doing it. So maybe there's still hope that they will survive in the Midwest. Based on what we've heard, Mary Barkowiak was who was going to give this update, but since her and I worked together to reach out to the feds to see what's the status of this permit that was issued in Wisconsin, she has been talking with Fritzy, well, had talked with her a handful of times, and it just sounded like she just was giving up on hoping whether this species was actually going to survive in the Midwest. But it's encouraging maybe that the state of Michigan is doing it. So we'll just have to stay tuned, I suppose.
Yeah, at least it gives us the opportunity to learn more. So, so thank you again, Maureen.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Fingers crossed on all of this. And then Kelly's going to give us an update on NR 40 revisions.
Right. Okay. So first, I'm just going to talk a little bit about background of NR 40, and then I'll show you kind of our timeline of where we're at for the current round of NR 40. So some of you are relatively new. I know there's names in the participants list that I don't recognize. So I'm assuming that not all of you are super familiar with how NR 40 works. So NR 40 is an administrative rule that was created and implemented by the DNR. In order to have an administrative rule, you have to get approval by the legislature through a statutory authority to do an administrative rule. So we initially got that back in 2001. But when they gave the DNR the authority to create a rule on invasive species, they also said that the governor needed to appoint an invasive species council, and that council would advise the DNR on its development of the rule. So we weren't able to actually start working on the rule until 2004 when that council was finally appointed. So between the council, the staff of DNR and staff of DATCAP, we basically reviewed all the different species assessment programs that we knew about in the world at the time to try to come up with a species assessment process that was going to work for us. And so we developed this species assessment group process that I'll go into a little bit more, and worked on and created these species assessment groups, or SAGs, and then also created the actual rule language itself, and then populated it with the first round of species. That first round were the species that were pretty much no-brainers, that were easy for pretty much everybody to agree, these are the species that are invasive. And so that was round one, and that started in 2004 and actually got implemented in 2009. So in 2011, we started again going and looking at the next round of species, knowing that we had a number of species, especially those that had some kind of commercially valuable use, that we wanted to assess and see if they would, if they should be regulated or not. So that process started in 2011, and by 2015, we got that second round in. One of the things that happened during that time is that the administrative rule process changed, making it really hard to get public input into the administrative rule development. It only basically allowed you to do that during the public hearing process at the very end of the whole thing. So we were really fortunate that we had this Invasive Species Council system already set up, because the whole SAG process that we use for assessment happens through the council. And so we can get a lot of public input prior to it actually going into the rulemaking process. The other thing they did is they put a time limit on how long it takes how long you can actually work on the rule, with like 18 months. And that doesn't give you much time for getting input from the public. So, we're really fortunate that we have this system, and that we've got a council that's been helpful in doing this as well. So in 2018, I'll go ahead and start sharing here, hopefully. There. Hopefully you'll be able to see my screen. Jeannie, can you verify that?
Yep, looks good. Great.
Okay, so in 2018, we started the council actually reviewed the process that we've been using, and they made a couple of tweaks to it. And one of the things that they did is they wanted us to also reassess some of the species that are currently regulated right now, and maybe we need to look and see if they need to be switched from prohibited to restricted, or if they should be taken off the list completely. So we started in 2018 with identifying what SAGs there would be. We now have 10 different species assessment groups. 5 are non-plant groups, so animals and pathogens and pests, and 5 of them are plant groups. One of those being aquatic, and then the other 4 being woodies, herbaceous ornamentals, agronomic species, and then a whole group of things that aren't being used commercially for anything as far as we know. So, so we have these 10 different SAGs. Each of those was assigned a staff person at DNR that is kind of in charge of making sure they get literature reviews developed, set up their SAGs with experts and stakeholders that know a lot about those individual species, and then actually have those meetings with those folks and share the literature reviews with them. That's a lot of work. Just developing the literature reviews alone is an incredible amount of work. We had a lot of student help with us, but all that also requires a lot of oversight. So we started that process back in 2018, and most of the species assessment groups have met now. All the terrestrial plant groups actually had pre-assessment meetings, because we had so many plants on each of those lists that we needed to figure out which ones really needed a full review, which needed a full lit review. And so each of those groups would meet with their SAG. The SAG would say, no, this one really isn't that invasive, or this one doesn't really, it's way too widespread and not really causing all that many impacts, so we don't really need to regulate it. And then about half of those species generally went to full assessment. And so all of the groups except 2 have now finished their evaluation evaluation meetings. We still have fish and crayfish to go, and aquatic plants, and I think both of those are going to be happening very soon, in the next month or so. So, so the next step is each of those species assessment group coordinators gets their list of species that recommended by their SAG. with the recommendations that they have. Should this species be prohibited? Should it be restricted? Should it be split listed, where it's regulated as prohibited in part of the states, restricted in other? Should there be some exemptions? So for example, are there cultivars that are known to not be invasive and so therefore don't need to be regulated? So each of those groups' recommendations goes to the council. The council discusses it, and then we'll create a kind of a master list of the species, of all the species that are going to be going out for public comment. So once we get all those together and the council reviews it, then it goes, we develop a system for public comments. In the past, this has been a series of meetings, in-person meetings in university auditoriums and places like that, and where we would do kind of a roadshow and explain what was going on, and people could come up and talk about individual species or recommend that they do or don't be regulated. This time we're probably going to do it by Zoom, and we'll probably have multiple meetings that are set up by Zoom for each kind of species group. We may lump like all the terrestrial plants together, maybe all the aquatics together. We haven't quite fully decided that. We'll also have online comments that people can submit comments online. Then we have to gather all that information that's come through from everybody and review that and take that to the council, and the council will revise its list of species that they are recommending for regulation. All of that happens before the actual administrative rule process happens. And so once the council has given the DNR their list of recommendations, then the DNR can start the rulemaking process, and we have 18 months to get through developing an economic impact analysis, to creating a whole bunch of bureaucratic paperwork that basically has to go with it, and having public hearings. And those public hearings are much more formal than the public listening sessions. So if you have comments on these things, please do it through the public listening sessions. It's going to be a whole lot easier to make revisions at that time than it is once we get to the very end of the process with public hearings. So then once we get all done with the DNR's aspect of it, we send it off through the Department of Administration, and then it goes to a bunch of different places in the legislature, and eventually the legislature either approves or doesn't approve of it. And then it actually has another 60 days before it gets actually put into place. So it'll be somewhere between 6 months to a year from the time we're done before it actually gets in place. So we're looking at probably 2023 before this new rule gets in place. So if you have a particular species that you're concerned about, that if you have not yet brought it to the attention of anybody, any of these species assessment group leaders, absolutely do it as soon as possible. And if you are concerned about it and you're hoping it will get regulated right away, it's not going to happen right away. It'll be a few years. The other thing to be aware of is that we are reviewing some of these species that are currently regulated. So for example, monk parakeets are currently regulated, and the caged bird people are not necessarily real happy about that. And so that's one that those folks were actually invited to the vertebrate assessment group in order to get their opinion on that. And we probably have a few plants that might be taken off the list and some other things like that. So, so if you have any particular questions about this process, we've got a few minutes here that you can ask them. Or if you have species-specific questions, come to the breakout group that I will be in for NR40, and we can talk about those in particular. So anybody have any particular questions?
Go ahead and unmute if you do have a question. We don't have any in the chat right now.
But one thing I did forget to mention is that early on in this process, we put out a call for species to be assessed, species that people thought maybe should be regulated. We got a lot of answers of things like Eurasian water milfoil and common buckthorn. So, but we also did get a number of other new species too. So these species, with the new species we're assessing, are called round 3. So anybody have any questions? If not, we can move on to the next thing on the agenda.
It looks like you did such a great job. No one has it.
Or they're all asleep because of the regulations.
Yeah, it's a good thing we decided to end at noon.
Right.
Amanda asks a good question here. Does there tend to be a lot of debate once it gets to the legislature?
Hopefully not. The good thing about the process that we have is that we deal with any concerns early on during the species assessment process. So for example, during round 2, it was the first time that we actually regulated commercially valuable plants. And so, we started doing things like, like crown vetch and other species that barberry that people were selling. And we worked with the nursery industry and the seed industry and others sufficiently that they pretty much agreed with what, at least the ones that were speaking up, agreed with what was we were recommending. We had one nurseryman who didn't agree, and he was actually a bit of a thorn in our side, sending out letters to all of his customers, telling them that they should disagree with this and oppose this. And about half of the customers that we heard from basically said, we don't agree with them. We think it's a good idea what you're doing. So, like, for considering that we have a lot of nurseries in the state, having only one that opposed was pretty good, I think.
I have a question. What about, besides the species list, what other things in NR 40 might be subject to change?
Yeah, and some of the other SAG coordinators that are on the call here might be able to answer that better. I know that I have one thing that came out of my herbaceous ornamentals group. And for species that are for restricted terrestrial plants that are going on the list, we have a phase out period. And so that means that if a nursery in Wisconsin has that plant in their stock, then they have a phase out period in order to sell those. They can't import them, they can't propagate any new ones, people can't bring them into the state, but if they've got them, we'll let them go ahead and sell them off. And it's been a period of 1 year for annuals, 3 years for perennials, and 5 years for woody species. And the herbaceous ornamental SAG has recommended actually shrinking those dates a little bit. And they also recommended that phase out period goes into effect at, I believe it's January 1st, regardless of when the rule went into effect. The way it's written right now, it's 5 years or 1, 3, or 5 years after the rule goes into effect. So if the rule goes into effect in May, then that phase out starts in May, which is in the middle of their growing and selling season. So they want it to be in January just to be really consistent. So that's the kind of thing that we'll probably put in there.
Did anybody else working on a SAG or any other groups have any other potential things that are coming up for changes other than just the species?
The species assessment group for aquatic invertebrates didn't have any rule changes, just adding species or changing their status.
And Maureen, do you know if there's anything with fish that might be changing?
Oh, I have no idea.
Yeah, that group hasn't met yet, so it'll be.
That'd be fish and crayfish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have a long period of time for more to come on this particular issue.
But the sooner people get their input in, the better.
Yeah, and that information will go out once we get those dates set for the first public comment period. The invasive species counselor and the I can never remember. Let's see, the education committee will be working on that to get that rolling. And then there's a lot more to NR40 than a list of species. So AIS Coordinators, that's actually the topic for the first training in small bites that comes up actually next week already, the 22nd, I think it is. So if you haven't gotten the list of the small bite trainings from the listserv when I sent it out, I know every once in a while somebody gets blocked or in their spam or something weird happens. Just email me directly and I'll be happy to send that out.
Can I ask Kelly one other question about NR40? We'll be changing narrative of NR40, right? Once, like, so we've go through the species assessments, but then I think, isn't there a point where we actually get into the actual rule to make sure we don't have changes?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So how things are written within NR40, does anything get changed?
The actual rule language itself.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's what Jeannie's question was about. Yeah, so if there are recommendations that come out of the public or out of the species assessment groups that make sense, yeah, we'll definitely make changes as need be.
So I guess, Jeannie, what they're going to maybe learn soon could change, but it will take some time.
Yeah, 2 to 3 years. So we're not going to worry about a whole lot. So it sounds like that about wraps up questions for that. And you were going to,